Jordan gave us permission to go woo for Foster Church weekend. That's great. Good job. Good job on the woos. I like that. I'm thinking the air conditioner is broken this morning. Not a reason for woo. But the doors in the back are open, so hopefully we'll get a little bit of breeze, and that will be helpful because it was kind of stuffy in here in the first gathering, and we'll get that fixed. Don't worry. I thought it was okay, and then it wasn't okay, so that's a bummer. But we're here together, and that's a good thing, right? Are you ready for this? We're pushing. That's right. Nice job. Didn't even have to prompt you. That's the good thing about being part of some cool people. I like that. Okay, so we pushed pause on Blooming in Babylon. We're going to get back to that in the fall. And I got just a couple of weeks here where I want to share some things from the scriptures that are, I suppose you could say all of the scriptures are dear to my heart, but I guess in this way they're especially dear to my heart. So, but let's start with this. I want to give you some reasonably good advice from some celebrities. Okay, you ready for this? So Bill Murray gives some good advice. He says, whatever you do, always give 100% unless you're donating blood. See, I told you, that's good advice. Okay. Oscar Wilde said, if you're going to borrow money, borrow it from a pessimist. You have to think about that one, I suppose, for a second. I like Reba McEntire said, this is good. She says, every day, she says, to succeed in life, you need a wishbone, a backbone, and a funny bone. And there really is some wisdom to that, isn't there? Yeah. This next one, Robert Orban, who was a comedian years gone by, this is great. Every day, he says, I get up and I look through the Forbes list of the richest people in America. If I'm not there, I go to work. That's smart. And now this last one is because it's the season. 'Tis the season. And some of the best advice I think ever given in a retirement speech came from Marshawn Lynch a few years ago. He said, start taking care of y'all's mentals, y'all's bodies, and y'all's chicken. That's really good advice. By chicken, of course, he meant money. Manage your money. All reasonably good advice. Now, I want to talk to you this morning from Psalm 37. And I'm calling it good advice, but some of you have a problem with that. So I want to just clear the air on some of this. And the reason you have a problem with it is, and let me qualify it. Yeah. So there are people, maybe even some of you, who can't seem to hear anything from God other than a command. There's a rigidness to your version of Christianity, of spirituality. You have a hard time thinking that God could offer you counsel, could offer you encouragement, could offer you advice. You can only hear God demand something. Here's what's crazy about this. The one verse we're going to look at today, and I know you're like 57 verses last week, one verse this week. Yeah, that's the beauty of variety. But everything in this one verse is actually commanded in other parts of Scripture. But friends, it is not the tone of the passage of Scripture that we're going to look at. It is not a command. It is not somebody shouting at you to do something that you're supposed to do. This is affectionate advice from somebody who cares about you. And it's advice that, when I say advice, I don't mean, well, yeah, so therefore you could like taking on some of the celebrity advice. Yeah, it's somewhat funny. There's some wisdom in it, but you're like, you could kind of take it or leave it. It's advice I'll take into counsel, right? And we don't have that same attitude toward things that are coming to us from the Bible. So it's not advice that you can take or leave. But it's not shouted at you. It's not somebody demanding something of you. It's affectionate. It's God the Father communicating to you from his word and by his Spirit with a warm heart. Can you hear that? Some of you have no problem hearing that. But some of you, there's a rigidness to your version that I think needs to soften up a little bit. Almost, if I could say, maybe lighten up a little bit. And those of you that know me know how serious I am about these things. But we've got to hear the tone. We've got to feel the affection of this. Now, this verse that I'm going to share with you is a verse that I have gone to on a regular basis throughout my walk with the Lord. And it is the sort of verse that I don't necessarily have to go to it when the sun is shining and the water's calm and everything's like the birds are chirping and everything's great. This is the sort of verse that I go to when I can't figure out which direction I'm supposed to go. I can't even find my own equilibrium. I go back to a verse like this. And I know some of you like the concept of a life verse. Oh, that's my life verse. I'm not a fan of that concept. And the reason I'm not a fan of a life verse concept, and if you have that, if you say, well, this is my life verse, I'm not criticizing you, I'm not making fun, I'm not a fan of the concept because the Bible says we're supposed to live by every word that comes from the mouth of God, not just a few inspirational ones. However, there are certain passages of Scripture that really help they just kind of settle down and act as a compass or a reset. And that is this verse for me. And I want to share that with you today. So as I do that, I want you to think about the life that you've wanted. The life that you've wanted. And I say it like that because very few people are living the life they ever dreamed of. If you are living the life that you've ever dreamed of, understand you are a rare breed. Almost nobody is living the life that they ever dreamed of. But I know this, I have never met a human being who doesn't want a good life. Every single human being I've ever met wants a good life. And they're trying to figure out how to experience that. So think about the life that you've wanted. Maybe it hasn't materialized, but my guess is that some of the elements that would make up this life that you've ever wanted are contained right here in this verse. So our verse this morning is Psalm 37, verse 3. And it reads like this: trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. So we're going to explore this morning. Very simple. I want you to say it with me as I say it again. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Now you'll notice that it's a single sentence with 4 verbs, 2 conjunctions, and a semicolon. And in the first gathering, people laughed when I said that, which is funny to me because sometimes when I say things, I'm trying to be funny and nobody laughs. And other times I say things, I'm not trying to be funny and people laugh. And I think I just have a quirky personality or sense of humor. When I say it's a single sentence with 4 verbs, 2 conjunctions, and a semicolon, I'm not actually trying to be funny, but for some reason that's funny to you. But I do mean it. All of that matters. The single sentence means that we're meant to take all 4 of these verbs together. Let's do our little work here. It's been a while because we've been in big, large text. It's been a while since we've used our telestrator. But we're given 4 verbs here. It's trust, do, dwell, and befriend. Those are our 4 verbs. We're supposed to take all 4 of these verbs together. Then we've got 2 conjunctions. What do you want? Yellow? Sure. And. Those are our 2 conjunctions. Again, showing us that the verbs are all connected. A single sentence with 4 verbs and 2 conjunctions. And then maybe one of the coolest parts, what do you want, blue? Sure. Is the semicolon. And if you remember, which I've never been super good at English, but a semicolon is kind of a cool little thing. I mean, you can use it to make an emoji, kind of a wink if you put the other side of a parentheses behind it. Looks like that, you know. Remember that? Before there were actual emojis, you'd make them up. That's not what's happening right here. It's a real live semicolon. And semicolons are cool because they take what otherwise would be 2 sentences, real live sentences, and they come together to show that these are part of the same idea. So trust in the Lord and do good is a fine sentence all by itself. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness is also a fine sentence in itself. But with that semicolon, it takes what would otherwise be 2 sentences and combines them to show us that it's the same idea. All of it, the bottom line is that this whole thing is coming to us as a single idea. We're not supposed to take it as 4 pieces of advice. It's a single piece of advice. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. So, this is what we get this morning. Now that said, it's a single piece of advice, but we have to take it in its parts. So let's look at each phrase along the way. The first one is to trust in the Lord. And trusting in the Lord grounds your life. And I hesitated using that word grounds because some of you, again, there's certain parts of our past or whatever that we filter through what we're hearing, and some of you hear ground and all you think of is being in trouble. You're grounded and you can't do certain things or go certain places. You're grounded. That's not what I'm saying here. Trusting in the Lord does not ground you in that way. Trusting in the Lord is an anchor. It grounds you like an anchor to something bigger than the moment. Remember, this isn't the advice that we necessarily need when the water's calm, the sky's blue, and the birds are chirping. This is the sort of advice we need when we can't figure out what to do. When life has upended us and we're like, what in the world is happening right now? We come back to this. At least this is what I've done time and time again. Trust in the Lord. It grounds me. It anchors me to something bigger than the moment. It grounds me to something that is bigger than the problem. And maybe most importantly, it grounds me to something other than myself. Trust in the Lord. It has a stabilizing effect on us. We hear advice in our lives like, we hear it commonly, trust in yourself or believe in yourself. And we should recognize that it doesn't mean that self-confidence is wicked and evil and should be wholesale rejected. We understand that that could get way out of balance and we could become our own idols. We could become like thinking that we're our own source and all of that. And so, yes, that should be like, we should not go in that direction. But in reality, self-confidence only goes so far. I mean, we know our own track record. Right? How much confidence really should we put in ourselves? I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, we probably would recognize, anybody who's a follower of Jesus recognizes that they're not enough. If you're a follower of Jesus, you've already acknowledged that you are not enough, that you need somebody other than yourself, particularly with your standing before God, but also in life. And it's a great place to be. That's a great realization to have, because the fact is God did not create us to be islands, to be so self-confident that we need nothing else, because in fact we're not enough. And so our self-confidence should only go so far, and really probably shouldn't go that far. Trust here means to have confidence in. So when the psalmist says trust in the Lord, he's saying, hey, everything's going crazy right now. First couple of verses talk about fretting. Don't fret, don't be anxious, don't be worried, all of those things, because life can be crazy. And so he grounds us initially with this thought: have confidence in God. Not in yourself, not in the situation, not ultimately in others, though there's elements of that that are fine, but ultimately have confidence in the Lord. Because his track record is really solid, friends. The Lord's track record is really solid. Later in this verse, in this psalm, the psalmist said this, and I love it. It's like a testimony of a long life. He says, I have been young, and now I'm old. Yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken or his children begging for bread. It's a solid testimony to say, I've observed life for quite some time, and God takes care of his children. So if you're a child of God, have confidence in him. Trust in the Lord. Most of you know that I'm leaving for a sabbatical in a couple of weeks. And it's a funny thing. I'm trying to figure out how I'm supposed to feel about that. Many of you have asked me, hey, are you getting excited? And I'm like, I'm not. Am I supposed to be excited about it? Am I supposed to be happy? I don't know how to deal with it quite yet. One thing's interesting as I've tried to get a read on this is when I think beyond it and I start thinking about 2025 and City Point Church, I'm actually more excited about that than I am about leaving, about being on sabbatical. And so that's helpful for me. I'm like, oh, that's a good sign. Like, that's good. I'm already looking forward to being back and I'm not gone yet. That's helpful for me. But I've not been this way before. I've not done this. I don't know how to process it. And so I'm kind of struggling with that. So that'd be something you could pray with me about for sure. I really appreciate that. I definitely have confidence in our elders and our staff. I have confidence in you that you're going to care for one another. But I care deeply about this church. I care about your well-being. And so I'm like, it's an issue of faith for me. I have to have confidence in God for you, for the church while I'm away. So you can pray with me about that, right? When I go to this verse, I go, okay, when I remember who God is, I'm all right. This is good. It's good. And I want to get excited about it, but I'm not there yet. Because I still go, am I supposed to be excited about it? Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so there's this stabilizing effect. Reality is there's plenty in life that is destabilizing. There's elements in life that are really a challenge for us. Life looks a lot like a stock market chart. Right? Think about it for just a moment. Think about the things in life that can be destabilizing. That might be a picture of it right there. Some of you, that looks like a picture of your career. It's not what you planned. That is not the life that you thought you would have, but that looks like your career. And it's like, oh, that's not what I wanted. I get it, 100%. Some of you look at that and you're like, that looks like my relationship with my children. And that is not what anybody wanted. Others, you go, marriage? Yep. My vision of the future? My emotions in this election cycle? And others, you're like, actually, that just looks like a picture of my stock portfolio in the last 7 days. And you're like, I get it. It's that, right? That feels a lot like life, doesn't it? Where we then go, okay, but I'm going to put my confidence in the Lord. Because when we put our confidence in the Lord, it doesn't necessarily change the circumstances, though God is, friends, all-powerful, and he is able to change circumstances. But when we cognizantly, when we take this verse on and say, I'm going to strive to do this, when we put our confidence in the Lord, it isn't so much the circumstances that change, it's us. God does this work in us when we put our confidence in him. This is important. And it needs to be said that the most important aspect of trusting in the Lord is in regard to our eternal well-being. That God is very serious about our eternal well-being. And he has said, without a living a relationship with his Son, Jesus Christ, we will perish. And so, friends, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, we are anchored. Our trust in Jesus, our faith in Jesus has anchored our eternity. What goes on in this life, all of that's really important, confidence in the Lord. But ultimately, everything in this life is going to be behind us. There are things right now behind you in life that used to keep you up at night, and now you think and you're like, oh, was that big of a deal? In the moment, it sure was. But you got through it. God helped you. But most importantly is eternity. Because at some point, everything in this life is going to be behind us. And that's why trusting in the Lord Jesus is critical for our eternal well-being. So if you're listening this morning and you're not a follower of Jesus, every song we sang this morning, right at the heart of this text this morning, putting our confidence in the Lord Jesus is what anchors our eternity. God has promised us that if we have his Son, we have life. But without his Son, we won't see life. So, this is the first of these 4 imperatives. We've got to trust in the Lord. Now let's add to it this next one, do good. Trust in the Lord and do good. Doing good makes life substantive. Whereas trusting in the Lord grounds our life. We get stabilized, we're anchored. Now we, from that position of confidence in God, we do good. In a myriad of ways, opportunities, options, we do good. And doing good is substantive to our lives. I guess I would illustrate it in this way. Earlier this week, in my house, Jesse typically makes dinner. And on Sundays, it's always been, even when our kids were little and in the house and all of that, Sunday nights are fend for yourself night. You fend for yourself. Meaning you can have whatever you find. It doesn't matter. You want a bowl of cereal? Have a bowl of cereal. It doesn't matter. Fend for yourself. Jesse makes lunch, and then from there, fend. And it was great. The kids, that was fine, a fine deal. But normally, during the week, Jesse makes dinner. So it's just the 2 of us now. And so we're having conversation, and I just happen to say, hey, what's for dinner? And she's just happened to say salad. And normally, now we eat a lot of salad. I like salad. Multiple times a week we have salad. But normally it's something like, oh, I'm going to put a steak on the grill, or I've got chicken, and so it's a chicken salad, or it could be salmon, it could be pork, it could be fish, it could be venison, it could be a lot of things. But she just said salad. And I was like, where is this night going right now? What is happening right now? So I said, hey, is there any protein in this salad? And she assured me there was. And I was like, whew, that's good. And then I thought about this. Doing good it makes life substantive. And I made this connection that doing good is to our lives what protein is to our bodies. Doing good is to our lives what protein is to our bodies. Protein is the building block of life. It's where structure is established, growth, repair, and even that's where we get our energy. Right? So it is almost a little counterintuitive. We think if I'm doing good, then I'm giving out, and therefore it's the opposite of taking in protein. But there's if you will, a spiritual dynamic in play here, where when we trust in the Lord and we do good, we're the recipients. It gives us substance to life. It's when we're doing good, it's when we get stronger, things can be repaired, we actually get energy from that. So the scriptures just say do good. We can come up with a lot of ways. We should do good methodically. It should be built into the rhythm of our lives. Serving in various capacities in our homes, in our neighborhoods, in our places of employment, within the local church, all of that. We should be methodical about it. There's also occasions when we can do good. Like this coming weekend's Foster Church weekend. Foster Family Night Out. Friday night is it's a powerful night, friends. Dozens of these foster kids come in and we take care of their parents, and we take care of the kids. We just have this party atmosphere. And in reality, we've got a lot of people signed up to be a part of this, to help, to serve. But if you're not, there's still room. And you go, well, if we got a lot of people, I'm not needed. No, friends. You're missing something if you think that. Here's what you're missing. You need it. If you're not here, we'll get the job done. But you need it. You need to see the body of Christ, the family of God in action and be a part of it. You need to see the dozens of foster kids running amok. You need to see the foster parents, people who have opened their homes and their hearts to children that aren't theirs, to give them a place. You need to see that. As a part of a community, you need to see that. Doing good is substantive. So we can do that occasionally, we can do it randomly, we can do it indiscriminately, meaning we don't do it with favoritism. We don't just love those who love us. Jesus said we're supposed to love people who don't love us, and so we need to do good. We need to do good practically. Doesn't it seem like we put things in categories, and so we go, well, if it's practical, it's not spiritual? Friends, trust me. In your home, some of the most practical things are the most spiritual things. It might not feel spiritual to fold a load of laundry, but if you do that for the right reasons, it's a spiritual endeavor. You fold a load of laundry so that somebody else doesn't have to do it, and maybe even you do it when you're not the person who normally does it, and you could fill in the blank. I just said laundry, but you could fill in the blank to any sort of thing at home that somebody else normally does, and if you do that for the right reasons, that very practical thing is a very spiritual thing. At least it would be in the eyes of God. It's an act of service. It's doing good. The key to all of this, doing good, is that we're doing good for the right reasons, of course, right? That we're not just trying to make ourselves look good. We're not just trying to make ourselves feel good, but it's coming from the heart. And certainly we're not trying to do it to earn God's favor. We need to do it from a position of having people who are loved, not trying to get love, but we do it from a position of we do good because we are loved, not to try to earn it. That's an important aspect of this, right? All right, so we trust in the Lord, and that grounds us. And we do good, and that adds substance to our lives. This third imperative is it's a really curious one. Dwell in the land is what it says. And dwelling in the land ensures that life is balanced. And this, I want to talk about this for a little bit here. To dwell. In a basic, like surface level understanding, to dwell in the land is to be an inhabitant, which of course is a passive endeavor. You're just here. You exist. You're living in the land. But this is something deeper here. When the psalmist tells us to dwell in the land, he's telling us something. This is, remember, good advice. What does he mean? What's the deeper idea of dwelling in the land? And how does that bring balance to our lives? Well, balance is a very important aspect of life. There's no doubt about that. A life out of balance is not a healthy life. And probably, so it's not healthy, but maybe more personal, something that we realize or feel more readily is, we could say, a life out of balance is actually not a fun life either. You ever just go, well, I just want to do the things that are fun. Well, who doesn't? But a life out of balance is not a fun life. It's a mess, and you start feeling it pretty quickly. So balance is a very important aspect of life. And here's a for instance. According to God's design, according to the rhythms of God, we're supposed to work and we're supposed to rest. And there's a rhythm to it. Work and rest. Work and rest. That's a healthy life balance. Okay? Too much work or too much rest is not pleasing to the Lord. That might surprise some of you. God is neither pleased with workaholics or people who are lazy. And some of us have such a, quote, work ethic that we know God frowns upon being lazy, but we somehow think he admires somebody who works all the time and never rests. And I'm telling you, he doesn't. And the scriptures bear that out. We're supposed to work and we're supposed to rest. It's part of the rhythms of life. A balanced life is a healthy life. Remember the old saying, all work and no play makes you a dull person, dull boy, dull girl? Well, that's very true, isn't it? So there's a balance to this. But more than that, Jesus' followers have a particular balance to strike in this way. I want to show you this image here, this ridge line. You see that? Isn't that beautiful? Some of you are like, I want to be there right this minute. Just hang with me for a minute. You can't go there yet, but you can imagine it. This ridge line, those are some steep hills, right? That's a steep mountain, but as long as this guy is on this trail on the ridge line, he's in good shape. This is great, right? You didn't want to go too far to the left or too far to the right. Either way, it's going to look like a scene from The Princess Bride where Wesley is head over heels falling down the hill saying, true love. And then, what's her face? The princess tumbles down after her, and then they meet up with the ROUSs and all of that, right? So you want to stay on the ridge line for sure. But here's what I find, followers of Jesus, we have to strike a particular balance here. We don't want to go too far left, too far right. See, here's how I would define this. Too far left is a follower of Jesus who hasn't arranged his or her life around the mission of Jesus. The mission of Jesus is not yet a priority. Jesus' mission is to go into all the world and make disciples. Therefore, anybody who is a disciple is supposed to be engaged in some way or ways in Jesus' mission. We should be able to draw straight lines between our activities and the making of disciples, and that shows up in a myriad of ways, particularly within the local church. But there are some people who have been following, quote, I don't mean to question salvation or anything like that, but they have never rearranged their schedule, their life, so that the mission of Jesus is priority. You're not on the ridgeline, friends. You're somewhere to the left, which is not where you want to be. We got to strike a balance here. Don't go to the left. Arrange life so that the mission of Christ is a priority in your life. If you're a follower of Jesus, that would mean you understand what it means to follow Jesus. To do otherwise would be almost a self-confession to say, other than I know I'm a sinner and I need God's grace, therefore I've received Christ as my Savior. Other than that, you've misunderstood what it looks like to follow Jesus. But here's the balance. Too far to the right is being, and I'll put this in quotes, in quotes, being so committed to the mission of Jesus that you've forgotten that you're a human being. And that's one of those rigid forms of Christianity that I hope we can, in some ways, soften up. Other ways, maybe we need to blow it up because it's not healthy. And in the same way that I said, if you can't hear anything from God other than a shouted command or an order, I want to change the Bible wants to change your view of God. Okay? And here, I know people who are so committed to the mission of Jesus that they're not living life. They're not remembering that they're a human being. We're told here to dwell in the land. Humans are part of creation. You are a part of God's good creation. When he created Adam and Eve, our prototypical parents, they were told to tend the garden and eat its fruit. And in doing that, they were obeying God. God did not create Adam and Eve and then say, now go into all the world and make disciples. There wasn't any other disciples to be made. They were just supposed to live. Basic life stuff. Go out. Be about. Do things. Have friends. Play a game. Share a meal. Explore. Enjoy God's good earth. Breathe. I don't know if you've ever put this together, but I'll point it out just in case you haven't. Every single time one of you tells me that you're going on vacation or taking a weekend away or something like that, I always celebrate it. And part of the reason for that is because I want you to recognize that you're being a human at that moment. Yeah, the mission's important, and you being gone is like, okay, we'll definitely find somebody to fill in. You'll be missed, but you'll be back. So go and have fun. Go relax. Go breathe. And part of the reason that I do that purposefully is because my initial discipleship, the environment that I was initially discipled in 30 plus years ago, when I was a brand new Christian as a young man, it was so rigid that, yeah, you were kind of okay to go on vacation, but you better be back on Sunday because it's not appropriate to miss a Sunday. It's like I almost had to get saved out of that mess. It's not a healthy balance, friends. Dwell in the land is what we're told. So, too far to the left, no, it's not good. Make sure Jesus' mission is priority and is top priority in your life. But don't forget that you're a human being. Dwelling in the land is an important aspect of life. When you dwell in the land, you're obeying God. Right? Is that okay? It needs to be purposeful. It's a necessary part of the balance of life. Now, one little twist to this is, as human beings, a lot of us, probably not all of us, but a lot of us tend to be somewhat discontent with the life that we're living right now. Because again, it's not the life we dreamed of. In some ways, it's good and we're thankful, but in other ways, you're like, I didn't know I was signing up for this. This doesn't qualify as fun, you know? And so we tend to think, well, okay, I'm going to dwell on that. I'm going to live my life, but it's when things get better, I'm going to do it. Or I want to live a life that is somewhere other than right here and right now. I want to fast forward into the future somehow, or go to some other place. And so the twist to this is, no. If you're going to live, you have to live right now. If you're going to live your life, you got to live it right now, not somewhere else in some other day or when things get better. I recently finished reading Corrie ten Boom's book, The Hiding Place. And it's a classic. If you're not familiar with it, she was in her early 50s in Holland during the rise of the Third Reich, Nazi Germany. And her and her family were hiding Jews in their home. And they got discovered. And they were arrested, imprisoned, and eventually her and her sister ended up in one of the Nazi concentration camps in Germany. And so we think, well, whoa, that's no place to dwell. Dwelling in the land probably wasn't something they're like, wow, let's do it now. This is something else. This is a horrible, terrible place in a million ways. And yet, when you listen to her story, which is a magnificent story, heart-wrenching, but also super inspiring, her and her sister Betsy found ways to live life. They found things to celebrate. They found things to be grateful for. They engaged the other prisoners, the other people, even the guards. It's a crazy story. That is, like, if they can dwell in that land, if they can live life in that life, friends, you and I can too. And in some ways, we go, yeah, it's not a concentration camp, but it's not fun. And we get it. But this is God's advice, his affectionate advice to us. In this life, it's a mixed bag. There's never going to be a time in this life when everything's perfect. It's just not going to happen. Try as we may, we will not set up heaven on earth. Even though we're supposed to pray for it. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's never going to be perfect until it's perfect. And so if we're going to dwell in the land, we got to do it right now, friends. Trust in the Lord. Have confidence in the Lord. Do good. And dwell in the land. Now we've got this last imperative here, this last verb that tells us to befriend faithfulness. And that gives us, by befriending faithfulness, gives us an enjoyable life. And that's interesting language, isn't it? Make friends with faithfulness. Sounds kind of different. Faithfulness is doing what we ought to do when we ought to do it, doing what we said we're going to do when we said we'd do it. It's basic stuff, right? Faithfulness. But we're supposed to make friends with faithfulness. Make friends with faithfulness. It's like we want to visit faithfulness and go to faithfulness's house. And faithfulness comes to the door. And faithfulness opens the door and we say, hey, faithfulness. And faithfulness says, hey. And then we ask faithfulness a question. We go, hey, faithfulness, who's your BF? Who's your best friend? Faithfulness doesn't even stutter for a moment. Faithfulness says, Jesus. And we go, oh, yeah, I get it, 100%. There's nobody been faithful like Jesus is faithful. So, of course, faithfulness's best friend is Jesus. So then we're like, okay, yeah, I got that. Who's your NBF? Who's your next best friend? And here's what we want. Each and every one of us, we want faithfulness to say our name. We want faithfulness to go, oh, it's you. You're my next best friend. This is what it says. Befriend faithfulness. Make friends with faithfulness because there's something really enjoyable about being faithful. There's something beautiful about it. A friend is somebody that you're attached to with kind of bonds of loyalty and feelings of affection. And we're supposed to be loyal to faithfulness. We're supposed to be affectionate toward faithfulness. That's cool. But then we would have to ask, is this a generic statement? Faithfulness to what? And here it is, friends. That brings us back to our single sentence with 4 verbs, 2 conjunctions, and 1 semicolon. It comes full circle right here. We are to befriend faithfulness in trusting the Lord and doing good and dwelling in the land. And that's what makes life enjoyable. So that's good advice, friends, from the Lord. And isn't this the life that you want? Aren't the elements of the life that you want contained right here? You want a life that's anchored, that's grounded, that's substantive, that's balanced, and that's enjoyable? Who doesn't want that? And so the advice is, trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. So I'm reading for the first time John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. Some of you read that way back when you were in school. I'm not done with it yet, so if you have read it, do not spoil it for me. I'm about a third of the way through it, and I'm finding it quite interesting. And there's a particular family, but it's in this era, kind of Dust Bowl, Great Depression era, when there's this shift taking place in the farming communities of the Midwest in particular. I can't remember if it's set in Oklahoma, East Texas, something like that. And back in the day, for several generations, there's these tenant farmers. And now in the industrial age, there's this shift taking place, and they're making this great big farming equipment. And the farms are being taken over by big business. And all of these tenant farmers they've been living on this land that they don't own. And they've been living in these homes that they don't own. That was tenant farming. And now that the farms don't need all the hands because they got all the equipment, these tenant farmers are being forced out of their homes and off the land. And so there's this particular family that is the centerpiece of the story. And as I said, like, a quarter or a third of the way through the story, they're at the place where they've got to go west, and they don't have a 36-foot U-Haul. They have to get rid of all their stuff. So all of their possessions, all of their family treasures, all of this stuff, they can't take it with them. They just have a select few little things that they get to bring. And so they go down to town with all of their stuff, and they have to sell it for pennies on the dollar, and it's terrible. It's kind of heartbreaking for them. And they're sitting around after the men went and sold all their stuff, and they're like, well, what did you get? And the one guy says, we get $18. All of their stuff for $18. And they're sitting there with just basically nothing, a few blankets and a few mattresses that they're going to tie on top of this ragged old car. And one of the characters says this, how can we live without our lives? And I just stopped. I'm like, wait a second, what? And I underlined that. I own the book, don't worry. I underlined it. How can we live without our lives? Now, of course, they're equating that to their stuff, and that's not what I'm equating it to. We can live without stuff. I'm assuming in the story they figured out how to live without their stuff. But how can we live without our lives? Think about the life that you wanted, that I mentioned at the beginning. As I said, the life we've dreamed of rarely materializes the way we've dreamed of it. We've got to live the life that we have. But Psalm 37 verse 3 is life. And we can't live our lives without life. How can we live without our lives? Trusting in the Lord and doing good, dwelling in the land and befriending faithfulness. That is our lives, friends. And that's good advice. So let's stand together. And we've been building this into from time to time into our rhythms, sometimes during the music time. But I decided this morning that we're going to pray together. Some of you are like, oh, I don't like it when we do that. There's no pressure. You don't have to. You can just stand there and sing if you want. But I want to really encourage you to find some people around you to pray. And I'm giving you what to pray. Pray Psalm 37 verse 3. Pray that we could take this good advice, that we can hear it as it is, affectionate counsel from a good and loving God. Pray for one another in this way. When we do this sort of thing, even though it's a little uncomfortable at times for some, it's a reminder that when we come together on the Lord's Day, it's not an individual endeavor. It's a community endeavor. We come together. So we've done the part of sitting in rows and staring at the back of one another's head and listening to somebody teach. But let's do the together part for a few moments, can we? And again, if you're not comfortable with it, don't worry. Nobody's going to pressure you. I'm not pressuring you. You can just stand and pray yourself and sing. But I really encourage you to turn to some people around you and spend some time praying. Pray that we can get this good advice settled in our souls. Let's do that. God bless you.